Sarah Martinez walked through the gleaming marble lobby of Henderson Defense Corporation, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. She had traded her military uniform for simple jeans and a plain white t-shirt, wanting to blend in during her undercover assessment of the company's security protocols. The defense contractor had been experiencing mysterious breaches, and the Pentagon needed someone with her specialized skills to investigate without raising suspicion. At 38, Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from 2 decades of military service, though few would guess her rank by looking at her today. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. The janitorial supplies cart she pushed was borrowed from the actual cleaning crew, who had been briefed to cooperate with her mission. The elevator dinged as she reached the 15th floor, home to Henderson's most sensitive research and development division. Sarah had memorized the building's layout during her preparation, but seeing it firsthand revealed security gaps that concerned her. Cameras had blind spots, and several doors she passed showed signs of tampering that suggested insider involvement in the breaches. As she moved through the corridors, documenting everything with a hidden camera, Sarah noticed employees barely glanced her way. To them, she was invisible, just another member of the cleaning staff going about routine work. This anonymity was exactly what she needed, allowing her to observe natural behavior and spot potential security risks. Her earpiece crackled softly with updates from her support team monitoring from a nearby van. So far, everything was proceeding according to plan. She had already identified 3 major vulnerabilities in the building's electronic security system and discovered that several high-clearance employees were leaving sensitive documents unsecured on their desks. The main target of her investigation was the company's CEO, Marcus Henderson, whose background check had revealed some questionable overseas connections. Sarah needed to get close enough to his office to plant surveillance equipment, but that would require accessing the executive floor, which meant maintaining her cover story while navigating increased security. As she approached the executive elevator, Sarah noticed a group of men in expensive suits gathered near the reception area. Their body language suggested tension, and she caught fragments of conversation about a major defense contract that was apparently behind schedule. One of them kept checking his watch anxiously while another paced back and forth, his voice rising with frustration. The CEO's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, suddenly looked up from her desk and spotted Sarah near the elevator. For a moment their eyes met, and Sarah wondered if her cover had been blown. But the assistant simply returned to her computer screen, apparently satisfied that Sarah belonged there. Sarah's training had taught her to notice details others missed, and something about the assistant's reaction bothered her. The woman had looked at her with recognition rather than dismissal, suggesting she might know more than she was letting on. This could complicate the mission, but it also might provide valuable intelligence if handled correctly. The executive floor buzzed with activity as Sarah stepped off the elevator. Lawyers, consultants, and senior managers hurried between offices, their faces tense with the pressure of whatever crisis was unfolding. Sarah pretended to empty trash cans while listening carefully to conversations, picking up clues about internal power struggles and potential security threats. Near the end of the hallway stood Marcus Henderson's corner office, its door slightly ajar. Through the gap, Sarah could see part of a large conference table surrounded by leather chairs. Documents were scattered across the surface, and she caught glimpses of what appeared to be classified military specifications. This was exactly the kind of security breach she had been sent to investigate. Her heart rate remained steady despite the high-stakes situation. Years of dangerous missions had taught her to stay calm under pressure, whether she was infiltrating enemy compounds overseas or corporate boardrooms at home. The skills were surprisingly similar, requiring the same attention to detail and ability to think several steps ahead. As she moved closer to Henderson's office, Sarah heard raised voices from within. The CEO was apparently in a heated discussion with someone about delayed shipments and missing components. The conversation provided valuable context for her investigation, suggesting that the security breaches might be connected to supply chain issues rather than espionage. Sarah carefully positioned her cleaning cart outside the office door, giving her a reason to linger while she gathered intelligence. The argument inside was growing more intense, with accusations being thrown about incompetence and possible sabotage. She activated the recording function on her hidden device, capturing evidence that might prove crucial to understanding the company's vulnerabilities. The mission was progressing better than expected, but Sarah knew that maintaining her cover would become increasingly difficult as she moved deeper into the building's secure areas. One wrong move or suspicious glance could expose her true identity and jeopardize not only her investigation, but also national security interests that depended on uncovering the truth about Henderson Defense Corporation. Marcus Henderson burst out of his office like a man possessed, his face flushed red with anger and his expensive tie loosened around his neck. At 45, he had built Henderson Defense Corporation from a small family business into a billion-dollar empire, but the current crisis threatened everything he had worked for. 3 major military contracts were behind schedule, and the Pentagon was asking uncomfortable questions about security protocols. His steel-gray eyes swept the hallway, looking for someone to blame for the chaos that seemed to follow him everywhere. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for next week, and he needed answers that would satisfy both his investors and his government contacts. The pressure was crushing, and his usual charm had worn thin under the weight of mounting problems. When Marcus spotted Sarah pushing her cleaning cart near his office door, something inside him snapped. Here was someone who represented everything that was wrong with his company's operations. In his mind, the cleaning staff had become careless, leaving sensitive areas unsecured and potentially compromising classified information. He had received reports about documents being moved and computers left unlocked after cleaning crews had passed through. "Hey, you," Marcus barked, striding towards Sarah with the aggressive confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "What do you think you're doing up here? This is a restricted area, and you have no business being anywhere near executive offices." Sarah looked up calmly, her expression neutral as she assessed the situation. She had encountered dozens of angry commanders and hostile officials during her career, and Henderson's tantrum barely registered on her scale of threatening situations. Her training kicked in automatically, keeping her voice steady and her body language appropriately submissive for her assumed role. "I'm sorry, sir," she replied in a quiet tone. "I was told to clean this floor as part of my regular duties. I can come back later if this is a bad time." Marcus wasn't listening to her explanation. The stress of recent weeks had stripped away his professional veneer, revealing the entitled bully underneath. He had grown up wealthy and powerful, surrounded by people who never challenged his authority or questioned his decisions. The current crisis made him feel vulnerable and out of control, emotions he couldn't tolerate. "I don't care what you were told," Marcus snapped, his voice carrying down the hallway and causing several employees to look up from their work. "Security protocols exist for a reason, and I'm tired of having random staff wandering around sensitive areas. You people need to learn your place." The contempt in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah felt a familiar flash of anger at his dismissive attitude. She had commanded elite military units and earned respect through years of dangerous service to her country. But Henderson saw only a lowly cleaning woman who didn't deserve basic courtesy. The irony wasn't lost on her, but maintaining cover required swallowing her pride. "Remove this woman from the building immediately," Marcus shouted to the security guards who had appeared at the sound of raised voices. "I want her credentials checked and her employment terminated. We can't have people like this compromising our security." The security guards, both former military men themselves, looked uncomfortable with Henderson's harsh treatment of what appeared to be an innocent employee. They recognized the type of leader Marcus represented, the kind who demanded respect without earning it, and blamed subordinates for systemic problems. But their paychecks depended on following orders, regardless of their personal feelings. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," one of the guards said apologetically, his tone much gentler than his employer's. "We'll need to verify your credentials and escort you from the building." Sarah nodded cooperatively, understanding that resistance would only make the situation worse and potentially blow her cover completely. As the guards moved to flank her, she made mental notes about their positioning and the security procedures they followed. Even this setback could provide valuable intelligence about the company's response protocols. Marcus watched with satisfaction as Sarah was led toward the elevator, his chest puffed out with the false pride of a man who had asserted his dominance over someone he perceived as powerless. The employees who had witnessed his outburst looked away uncomfortably, embarrassed by their CEO's behavior but too dependent on their jobs to speak up. Let this be a lesson to everyone, Marcus announced loudly, addressing the gathered staff. Security is everyone's responsibility, and I won't tolerate carelessness or unauthorized access to sensitive areas. We have procedures for a reason, and they will be followed without exception. The elevator doors closed behind Sarah and her escorts, but Marcus's anger continued to burn. He stormed back into his office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. His assistant, who had been watching the entire scene with growing concern, made a mental note to check the cleaning crew's credentials more carefully in the future. As Sarah descended toward the ground floor, she activated a hidden communication device to alert her support team about the change in plans. The mission would need to be modified, but her brief time on the executive floor had already yielded valuable information about the company's internal dynamics and security weaknesses. The guards remained professional during the elevator ride, but Sarah could sense their disapproval of their boss's behavior. This might create an opportunity to develop inside sources if she could find a way to reconnect with them under different circumstances. Military veterans often maintained loyalty to fellow service members, even across organizational boundaries. Marcus's explosive reaction had revealed more about his character than any background investigation could have uncovered. His willingness to humiliate and fire an employee without proper cause suggested someone who ruled through fear rather than respect, creating exactly the kind of toxic environment where security breaches flourished and employee loyalty disappeared. The security office in Henderson Defense Corporation's basement felt more like an interrogation room than a workplace, with its stark white walls, fluorescent lighting, and metal desk that had seen better days. Sarah sat calmly in an uncomfortable plastic chair, while the two guards, Jenkins and Rodriguez, shuffled through paperwork with obvious reluctance. Their body language suggested they were following protocol rather than pursuing any genuine security concerns. Jenkins, a graying veteran with 20 years of Army service, looked up from the employment records with a puzzled expression. "Ma'am, your paperwork seems to be in order, but Mr. Henderson was very specific about wanting you removed from the building. We're going to need to follow his instructions, even though this seems like overkill for someone just doing their job." Sarah nodded understandingly, recognizing the difficult position the guards found themselves in. She had been in similar situations during her military career, caught between unreasonable orders from above and her own sense of what was right. The key was maintaining her cover while gathering as much information as possible before being ejected from the building. "I understand completely," she replied softly, allowing a hint of disappointment to show in her voice. "I really need this job, but I don't want to cause any more trouble. Maybe there's been some kind of misunderstanding about which areas I was supposed to clean." Rodriguez, the younger of the two guards, leaned forward with sympathy in his eyes. "Look, between you and me, the boss has been under a lot of pressure lately. There have been some security issues in the building, and I think he's just taking it out on whoever happens to be nearby. It's not fair, but that's how things work around here sometimes." This casual admission provided exactly the kind of insight Sarah needed about the company's internal problems. She filed away the information about security issues while maintaining her innocent facade, asking follow-up questions that would seem natural for a concerned employee trying to understand what had gone wrong. "Security issues?" she asked with appropriate worry in her voice. "I hope I didn't accidentally do something wrong. The training they gave us was pretty basic, and maybe I misunderstood the rules about where we're allowed to go." Jenkins exchanged a meaningful look with his partner before answering carefully. "There have been some problems with sensitive information going missing, and management is cracking down on anyone who has access to secure areas. It's probably nothing you did personally, but they're being extra cautious about who can go where." The conversation was interrupted by the security office phone ringing sharply. Rodriguez answered with a professional greeting, but his expression quickly changed to one of surprise and confusion. After a brief exchange, he hung up and turned to his partner with raised eyebrows. "That was the Pentagon calling for Mr. Henderson," Rodriguez said quietly. "Something about a security consultation meeting scheduled for this afternoon." The caller seemed pretty insistent about speaking with him directly. Sarah's pulse quickened at this unexpected development. The Pentagon call might be related to her own mission, or it could represent a separate investigation into Henderson Defense Corporation's problems. Either way, it suggested that her superiors were maintaining pressure on the company from multiple angles. Jenkins frowned at this news, clearly recognizing the implications of direct Pentagon involvement. That's never a good sign when the brass starts calling personally. Usually means someone upstairs thinks we're not handling our problems internally. The two guards continued their quiet discussion about the company's mounting troubles, providing Sarah with valuable intelligence about employee morale and management dysfunction. It became clear that Henderson's explosive behavior was part of a pattern that had been damaging the organization's effectiveness for months. "Ma'am, we're going to need to escort you to the main exit now," Jenkins said apologetically, returning his attention to Sarah. "I wish things had worked out differently, but our hands are tied on this one. Maybe you can reapply in a few weeks when things settle down." As they prepared to leave the security office, Sarah made a careful decision to take a calculated risk that might advance her mission. She reached into her pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a standard business card, but was actually a communication device that would allow her to maintain contact with potential inside sources. "Before I go, would it be possible to leave my contact information in case any other cleaning positions open up?" she asked innocently. "I know Mr. Henderson was upset, but I really am good at my job when I'm working in the right areas." Rodriguez took the card without suspicion, promising to keep it on file in case opportunities arose. He had no way of knowing that the innocent-looking piece of cardstock contained sophisticated electronics that would allow Sarah's team to monitor communications and potentially gain access to the building's security systems. The walk to the main exit took them through the building's central corridor, giving Sarah one last opportunity to observe the facility's layout and security measures. She noticed several employees watching nervously as the small procession passed, their expressions suggesting that public firings and security escorts were becoming more common under Henderson's increasingly erratic leadership. As they reached the lobby, Sarah spotted a black sedan with government plates pulling up outside the main entrance. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental, and she suspected that her superiors were about to turn up the heat on Henderson Defense Corporation. The investigation was entering a new phase that would require different tactics and approaches. "Thank you both for treating me respectfully during all this," Sarah said sincerely as they reached the exit. "I hope things improve around here soon. Companies work better when everyone feels valued regardless of their position." Jenkins and Rodriguez exchanged another meaningful look, both recognizing the wisdom in her words. They had seen too many organizations destroyed by toxic leadership and knew that Henderson Defense Corporation was heading down a dangerous path unless significant changes were made soon. As Sarah stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, she activated a hidden communication device to update her support team about the developments inside the building. The mission had taken an unexpected turn, but the intelligence gathered during her brief infiltration would prove valuable for planning the next phase of the investigation. The Pentagon briefing room felt unusually tense as General Patricia Hawthorne reviewed the classified file spread across the mahogany conference table. At 55, she commanded respect throughout the military hierarchy as the Deputy Director of Defense Intelligence, and her presence at Henderson Defense Corporation later that afternoon would send a clear message about the government's concerns regarding recent security breaches. "Colonel Martinez has provided excellent preliminary intelligence," General Hawthorne said to the assembled team of analysts and investigators. "But Henderson's reaction to her presence suggests deeper problems than we initially suspected. A CEO who fires employees without cause and creates hostile work environments often has something significant to hide." The file before them contained Sarah's detailed observations about the company's security vulnerabilities, employee morale issues, and Marcus Henderson's increasingly erratic behavior. Combined with financial records and communication intercepts, the evidence painted a picture of an organization in crisis, possibly compromised by internal threats or external manipulation. Major Tom Bradley, Sarah's direct supervisor, leaned forward with concern evident in his voice. "General, Colonel Martinez's cover has been blown, but she's established contact with sympathetic security personnel inside the building. Should we proceed with the planned confrontation or modify our approach?" General Hawthorne considered the question carefully, weighing the tactical advantages of surprise against the potential benefits of a direct approach. The Pentagon had been tracking suspicious activities at Henderson Defense Corporation for months, but concrete evidence remained elusive. Sometimes the best way to flush out hidden threats was to apply pressure from multiple directions. We proceed as planned, she decided firmly. Colonel Martinez's ejection from the building actually works in our favor. When I arrive for our supposedly scheduled meeting, Henderson will be off balance and more likely to make mistakes. His treatment of someone he perceived as powerless will also give us psychological leverage during the interrogation. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. General Hawthorne would arrive at Henderson Defense Corporation, claiming to be following up on security protocols discussed during a previous Pentagon visit. When Henderson inevitably protested that no such meeting had been scheduled, she would express concern about his memory and organizational capabilities, using his confusion to justify a comprehensive security review. Meanwhile, Sarah would position herself outside the building to observe Henderson's reaction and coordinate with the surveillance team monitoring electronic communications. Her unique perspective as both the victim of Henderson's abuse and a highly trained intelligence officer would provide valuable insights during the confrontation that was about to unfold. What's our assessment of Henderson's psychological profile? General Hawthorne asked Dr. Lisa Chen, the team's behavioral analyst. How is he likely to respond when confronted with authority figures who can't be intimidated or dismissed? Dr. Chen consulted her notes before responding thoughtfully. Based on Colonel Martinez's observations and our background research, Henderson exhibits classic narcissistic leadership patterns. He's accustomed to controlling conversations and situations through aggression and economic power. When faced with military authority that outranks him, he'll likely attempt to deflect blame onto subordinates or claim ignorance of security problems. The psychological profile suggested that Henderson's confrontational behavior masked deep insecurities about his actual competence and authority. Men like him often compensated for feelings of inadequacy by bullying those they perceived as weaker, but crumbled when faced with genuine power that they couldn't manipulate or overcome. There's something else we should consider, Major Bradley added, reviewing intelligence reports from other agencies. Financial records show unusual payments to several offshore consulting firms that don't appear to provide any legitimate services. This could indicate either corruption or coercion, possibly both. The financial irregularities added another layer of complexity to the investigation. If Henderson was being blackmailed or corrupted by foreign agents, his aggressive behavior might represent desperate attempts to maintain control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his ability to manage. Alternatively, he might be actively collaborating with hostile interests for personal gain. General Hawthorne checked her watch, noting that the confrontation was scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours. I want full surveillance coverage of the building, with particular attention to any attempts by Henderson or his associates to destroy evidence or communicate with outside parties. If this investigation reveals espionage or treason, we need ironclad documentation for prosecution. The stakes extended far beyond Henderson Defense Corporation's internal problems. The company held contracts for critical military technologies that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. If security had been compromised, the damage to national security could be immeasurable, affecting everything from submarine designs to satellite communication systems. General, what's our contingency plan if Henderson becomes violent or attempts to flee? Asked Agent Sarah Kim from the FBI liaison team. His psychological profile suggests he might react unpredictably when cornered, especially given his recent behavior toward Colonel Martinez. The question highlighted the delicate balance between gathering intelligence and ensuring safety. Henderson had already demonstrated a willingness to abuse his authority and mistreat employees, suggesting that he might escalate to more serious criminal behavior if he felt sufficiently threatened by the investigation. We'll have armed agents positioned throughout the building under cover of a routine security inspection, General Hawthorne explained. If Henderson attempts to flee or destroy evidence, they'll be ready to intervene. However, our primary goal remains gathering intelligence about the security breaches and identifying any co-conspirators within the organization. As the briefing concluded, each team member understood their role in the complex operation that was about to unfold. The investigation had evolved from a simple security assessment into a potential counterintelligence operation with implications reaching the highest levels of government. General Hawthorne gathered the classified files, her expression reflecting the weight of responsibility she carried. In a few hours, she would face Marcus Henderson directly, armed with the knowledge that his treatment of Colonel Martinez revealed the character of a man who valued power over principle and control over competence. The confrontation would either expose a security threat or clear an innocent company of suspicion. But either way, the truth would finally emerge. Marcus Henderson paced nervously around his office, his earlier confidence completely shattered by the unexpected call from the Pentagon. The woman on the phone had been politely insistent that General Hawthorne would arrive at 3 o'clock to discuss security protocols, but Marcus had no memory of scheduling any such meeting. His assistant checked his calendar repeatedly, finding no record of the appointment, which only increased his anxiety about the situation. The stress was taking a visible toll on his appearance. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, and sweat stains were beginning to show through his expensive shirt despite the office's air conditioning. The confident executive who had bullied a cleaning woman just hours earlier was rapidly transforming into a paranoid man who jumped at every unexpected sound. "Sir, maybe you should call the Pentagon back to confirm the details of this meeting," suggested his assistant, Margaret, who had worked for the company long enough to recognize when her boss was spiraling into panic mode. "There might have been some confusion about scheduling, and we could clarify what General Hawthorne wants to discuss." Marcus shook his head frantically, unwilling to admit that he might have forgotten such an important appointment. His reputation as a successful businessman depended on appearing competent and in control, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. Calling the Pentagon to ask about a meeting he should remember would make him look weak and disorganized. "No, we'll handle this when she arrives," he said tersely, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "I'm sure it's just a routine follow-up about our security procedures. The government does these inspections periodically to ensure contractors are maintaining proper protocols." But even as he spoke, Marcus knew that something was wrong. Routine inspections were scheduled weeks in advance with detailed paperwork and specific agendas. Surprise visits from high-ranking Pentagon officials usually meant serious problems that required immediate attention and often resulted in canceled contracts or criminal investigations. The financial irregularities in his book suddenly seemed much more dangerous than they had that morning. The offshore payments that he had rationalized as necessary business expenses now felt like evidence of criminal activity that could destroy everything he had built. His hands trembled slightly as he considered the potential consequences of a thorough government investigation. At exactly 3 o'clock, the elevator chimed on the executive floor, and General Hawthorne stepped out with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding respect. She wore her dress uniform with its impressive array of ribbons and decorations, each one representing years of distinguished service to her country. Her presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the entire floor, causing employees to straighten up and speak more quietly. Margaret rushed to greet the general with appropriate deference, but she was clearly out of her depth when dealing with high-ranking military officers. "General Hawthorne, welcome to Henderson Defense Corporation. Mr. Henderson is waiting for you in his office, though I should mention that we seem to have some confusion about the scheduling of this meeting." General Hawthorne smiled pleasantly, but her eyes remained sharp and calculating as she assessed the assistant's nervous demeanor. "I'm sure Mr. Henderson will remember our conversation once we begin discussing the security issues that brought me here today. These matters can sometimes get overlooked when executives are dealing with multiple priorities." The general's words carried subtle implications that made Margaret even more uncomfortable. References to security issues and overlooked priorities suggested that Henderson Defense Corporation was under scrutiny for problems that could threaten their government contracts. She led General Hawthorne toward Marcus's office with growing concern about what this visit might mean for the company's future. Marcus stood when the general entered his office, extending his hand with forced enthusiasm that couldn't mask his underlying anxiety. "General Hawthorne, what a pleasure to see you again. Please have a seat and tell me how I can assist the Pentagon today." But General Hawthorne didn't immediately sit down. Instead, she studied Marcus with the analytical gaze of someone trained to detect deception and evaluate threats. Her silence stretched uncomfortably long, making Marcus fidget with his tie while she appeared to be reaching some kind of internal conclusion about his character. "Mr. Henderson, I'm here to follow up on our previous discussion about security protocols at your facility," she said finally. her tone professionally neutral but carrying an undertone of authority that could not be ignored. Specifically, I want to review how your company handles personnel with access to classified areas. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized the general was testing him. If they had discussed security protocols previously, he should remember the conversation and be able to respond knowledgeably. His failure to recall such an important meeting would suggest either incompetence or deliberate evasion, neither of which would reflect well on his leadership. Of course, security is our top priority here at Henderson Defense, he replied carefully, trying to buy time while his mind raced to figure out what the general wanted to hear. We follow all Pentagon guidelines regarding personnel screening and access control. Perhaps you could refresh my memory about the specific concerns we discussed. General Hawthorne's expression hardened slightly at his obvious attempt to deflect responsibility for remembering their supposed previous conversation. Mr. Henderson, I'm somewhat concerned that you don't recall our discussion about unauthorized personnel in secure areas. Just this afternoon, I understand you had an incident involving a cleaning staff member who was found in restricted sections of the building. The mention of the cleaning woman made Marcus's blood pressure spike as he realized this visit was connected to his earlier confrontation. Somehow his decision to fire that employee had attracted the Pentagon's attention, transforming what he thought was a minor personnel issue into a potential crisis that threatened his entire business. That incident was handled appropriately according to our security procedures, he said defensively, his voice rising slightly as stress overcame his attempt to remain calm. The woman was in an area where she didn't belong, and I took immediate action to ensure she was removed from the building. General Hawthorne nodded thoughtfully, but her expression suggested that she was evaluating his response against some internal standard that Marcus couldn't identify. The silence that followed felt ominous, like the calm before a storm that would sweep away everything he had worked to build. General Hawthorne walked deliberately to the window overlooking the company parking lot, her hands clasped behind her back in a pose that projected absolute authority. From this vantage point, she could see Sarah Martinez sitting in an unmarked surveillance van, coordinating with the technical team that was monitoring electronic communications throughout the building. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. Mr. Henderson, I need to share some information with you that will significantly change your perspective on this afternoon's events, the general said, turning back to face Marcus with an expression that mixed professional courtesy with barely contained disapproval. The woman you so rudely ejected from this building is Colonel Sarah Martinez, one of my most accomplished officers and a decorated Navy SEAL. The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications of this revelation hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly as he struggled to process the fact that he had not only insulted a high-ranking military officer, but had also potentially compromised a government operation. The confident businessman, who had bullied someone he perceived as powerless, was rapidly disintegrating into a panic-stricken man facing professional destruction. Colonel Martinez was conducting a classified security assessment of your facility when you chose to publicly humiliate her and have her forcibly removed. General Hawthorne continued, her voice remaining level but carrying undertones of steel that made Marcus flinch with each word. Your behavior toward her reveals serious concerns about your judgment and leadership capabilities. Marcus stumbled backward until he collapsed into his expensive leather chair, his hands shaking as he reached for a glass of water that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. The successful defense contractor who had built a billion-dollar empire was discovering that true power came not from money or position, but from competence, integrity, and respect for others regardless of their apparent status. General, I had no idea, he whispered, his voice barely audible as he struggled to find words that might somehow minimize the catastrophic mistake he had made. If I had known she was a colonel, I would never have treated her that way. There must be some kind of misunderstanding about what happened. But General Hawthorne's expression made it clear that there was no misunderstanding about anything. Mr. Henderson, Colonel Martinez's rank is irrelevant to how you treated her. The fact that you would abuse anyone simply because you perceived them as powerless tells me everything I need to know about your character and your fitness to hold security clearances. The general moved to Marcus's desk and opened a briefcase containing files that represented months of investigation into Henderson Defense Corporation's operations. Financial records, communication intercepts, and security reports painted a comprehensive picture of organizational dysfunction that extended far beyond a single incident of workplace bullying. While Colonel Martinez was conducting her security assessment, our financial analyst discovered significant irregularities in your company's accounts, General Hawthorne announced, spreading documents across the desk's polished surface. Payments to offshore entities that provide no identifiable services, unusual transfers coinciding with the security breaches, and communication patterns suggesting possible coordination with hostile interests. Marcus stared at the evidence with growing horror, recognizing records he thought were securely hidden from government scrutiny. The offshore accounts he had used for personal expenses and questionable business deals were now exposed as potential evidence of corruption or espionage. His desperate attempts to maintain cash flow during recent business difficulties had created a paper trail that looked increasingly criminal under official investigation. These financial irregularities, combined with the security breaches and your demonstrated lack of judgment in personnel matters, have led the Pentagon to question whether Henderson Defense Corporation can be trusted with classified military contracts. The general explained with clinical precision. Colonel Martinez's assessment confirmed our worst fears about this organization's security. Culture. The room seemed to spin around. Marcus, as he contemplated the complete collapse of everything he had worked to achieve. Government contracts represented over 60% of his company's revenue, and losing them would mean bankruptcy, unemployment for hundreds of workers, and personal financial ruin that would destroy his family's legacy in the defense industry. General Hawthorne, please, there has to be some way to resolve this situation, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation as professional pride gave way to raw survival instinct. I admit I made a serious mistake with Colonel Martinez, but that doesn't mean our entire organization should be punished. We employ good people who depend on these contracts. But the general's expression remained implacable as she gathered the incriminating documents back into her briefcase. Mr. Henderson, the security of our nation's military technology cannot be entrusted to organizations led by individuals who lack basic judgment and integrity. Your treatment of Colonel Martinez was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of deeper problems that make this company unsuitable for classified work. Through the office window, Marcus could see government vehicles arriving in the parking lot, their occupants moving with the purposeful efficiency of federal agents preparing to execute search warrants. The investigation that had begun with Sarah's undercover assessment was now expanding into a full-scale criminal probe that would examine every aspect of Henderson Defense Corporation's operations. The FBI will be conducting a comprehensive audit of your financial records and security procedures, General Hawthorne informed him matter-of-factly. Any evidence of espionage, corruption, or other criminal activity will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. Your security clearances are hereby suspended pending the outcome of this investigation. Marcus buried his face in his hands, finally understanding that his arrogance and cruelty toward someone he considered beneath him had triggered a cascade of consequences that would destroy everything he had built. The woman he had dismissed as an insignificant cleaning person was actually one of the most dangerous and capable officers in the United States military, and his abuse of her had exposed him to the full weight of governmental justice. Outside his office, employees were beginning to realize that something serious was happening as federal agents spread throughout the building, examining files and interviewing personnel. The toxic culture that Marcus had created through years of bullying and intimidation was finally facing accountability from authorities who could not be dismissed or intimidated into silence. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood at the podium in the Pentagon's main briefing room, addressing a gathering of military leaders and defense contractors about the lessons learned from the Henderson Defense Corporation investigation. She wore her dress uniform with the silver star she had recently received for exceptional service in combating threats to national security, both foreign and domestic. The Henderson case demonstrates how toxic leadership can compromise organizational security more effectively than any external threat, Sarah explained to the attentive audience. When employees fear their own management more than foreign adversaries, they become reluctant to report suspicious activities or security breaches, creating vulnerabilities that hostile actors can exploit. The investigation had uncovered a web of corruption and negligence that extended far beyond Marcus Henderson's personal failings. Several middle managers had been accepting bribes from overseas competitors in exchange for technical specifications, while others had deliberately ignored security protocols to avoid confronting their volatile CEO. The toxic culture Henderson created had infected every level of the organization. Marcus Henderson himself was now serving a federal prison sentence for conspiracy, corruption, and violation of national security laws. His offshore accounts had been traced to foreign intelligence services, revealing that his financial difficulties had made him vulnerable to recruitment as an asset. The arrogant businessman who had bullied a cleaning woman was spending his days in a federal correctional facility, his empire reduced to nothing. Colonel Martinez's undercover assessment revealed that the most significant security threat was not sophisticated espionage, but basic leadership failure, General Hawthorne added from her seat in the front row. When executives treat employees as disposable resources rather than valuable team members, they create exactly the conditions that foreign intelligence services look for when recruiting sources. The audience included several defense contractors who were clearly uncomfortable with the implications of Sarah's presentation. Many of them recognized similar patterns in their own organizations, where aggressive leadership and toxic workplace cultures had been tolerated or even encouraged in the name of efficiency and profitability. Jenkins and Rodriguez, the security guards who had treated Sarah respectfully during her ejection from the Henderson building, were now working for a new defense contractor with significantly better leadership and workplace culture. Their testimony about Henderson's behavior had been crucial in establishing the pattern of abuse that made employees vulnerable to foreign recruitment. The financial cost of the Henderson investigation exceeded $50 million in lost contracts, criminal prosecution, and security assessments of compromised projects, Sarah continued, clicking to a slide showing the economic impact of the security breaches. But the real cost was measured in damaged relationships with allied nations and potential national security vulnerabilities that took months to identify and correct. The former Henderson Defense Corporation facility had been acquired by a consortium of smaller companies committed to implementing ethical leadership practices and comprehensive security protocols. Many of the company's employees had found new positions with organizations that valued their skills and treated them with appropriate respect and dignity. Margaret, Henderson's former assistant, was now working as an office manager for one of the successor companies. She had provided crucial testimony about her former boss's erratic behavior and had helped investigators understand how his psychological instability had affected the entire organization's decision-making processes. The most important lesson from this investigation is that character matters more than competence when evaluating leaders with access to classified information, Sarah concluded, her words carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. Technical skills can be taught and improved, but fundamental character flaws create security risks that no amount of training or oversight can completely eliminate. After the briefing, several audience members approached Sarah to discuss similar situations in their own organizations. The Henderson case had become a cautionary tale throughout the defense industry, illustrating how personal integrity and professional competence were inseparable when it came to protecting national security interests. General Hawthorne joined Sarah as they walked through the Pentagon corridors, both women reflecting on the complex operation that had begun with a simple security assessment and evolved into a comprehensive counterintelligence investigation. The case had strengthened protocols for evaluating defense contractors and emphasized the importance of character assessment in security clearance decisions. Colonel, your performance during this operation exemplified the best traditions of military service, the general said with genuine admiration. You maintained professionalism and composure under difficult circumstances, gathered crucial intelligence despite personal attacks, and helped protect national security interests through exceptional dedication to duty. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, understanding that the Henderson investigation represented just one example of the ongoing threats facing national security in an increasingly complex world. Foreign adversaries were constantly seeking vulnerabilities in American institutions, and toxic leadership created exactly the kind of weaknesses that hostile intelligence services were trained to exploit. The investigation had also reinforced Sarah's belief in the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their apparent status or position. Henderson's assumption that a cleaning woman was powerless and insignificant had ultimately led to his downfall, while her own commitment to maintaining professionalism under pressure had helped expose serious threats to national security. As Sarah returned to her office to begin preparing for her next assignment, she reflected on the irony that Henderson's attempt to humiliate someone he perceived as powerless had ultimately revealed his own weakness and led to justice for his many victims. The military had taught her that true strength came not from dominating others, but from serving something larger than oneself with integrity, courage, and unwavering commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The Henderson Defense Corporation case was closed, but its lessons would continue influencing security protocols and leadership evaluation procedures for years to come, ensuring that Marcus Henderson's cruelty and arrogance would ultimately serve to strengthen the very institutions he had tried to exploit.